welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jenn, and today I am joined by the author of many works of historical fiction, several works, who is here to discuss one in particular today that is a gorgeous work of Gothic historical fiction. It is absolutely fascinating and riveting, and I am so excited. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Thank you for introducing me and for inviting me on your podcast, Jenn. I am Janie Chang, and the book that we're going to talk about is The Fourth Princess, which is a Gothic novel set in old Shanghai, 1911 to be exact. And I just love Gothic fiction. So this was a challenge when I thought about it to set a historical novel, but to bring in Gothic elements.
I love it. I am such a fan of both the Gothic and historical fiction, and I really enjoyed what you did with those things here. A general question first. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about your journey as a writer, your other works, and what drew you to historical fiction as a genre to explore.
So, first of all, I graduated with a degree in computing science because even though I really loved the idea of being a writer, I also wanted to be able to pay the rent. But so I had a wonderful time in the tech industry. But after a while, you can only push back what you really want to do for so long before it becomes soul destroying. And what actually brought things to a head for me was we had to move my mom into care. She had dementia, and I would go visit her and I would look at all these other seniors, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of them are wishing that they had done more to achieve their dream. And did I want to be 95 years old, thinking I should have done more? So I just kind of got my ass in gear, Jen, and I signed up for a creative writing class in the evenings with a university here. And in that first year, very naively, I thought, in this first year, I will write a novel. So, um, so I got three-quarters of the way through, and it was the best thing I've ever done for myself. And honestly, when I'm talking to some of your library patrons, some of whom might be aspiring authors, what I can say is you need to move that dream from the back burner to the front burner. And I think that for a lot of people, especially women, we find it hard to put ourselves first. So I hate to say this, but forking over the thousands of dollars to take this course probably forced it to the front burner. So anyway, luckily I was able to get a literary agent with, my almost finished manuscript, and I got a publisher with HarperCollins Canada. And since then, they've been kind enough to believe that I could write other books. So, The Fourth Princess is actually my sixth book. And it's just been, it's like the dream come true, finally.
So I read online that you are drawn to writing about family history and ancestral stories. What is it that draws you to a particular place or time? And does your background of extensive travel play a role in that?
So, first of all, I did not even know I was writing historical fiction at first. You said, what drew you to historical fiction? And really, it was because my first novel was based on the tragic life of my grandmother. And that story kind of haunted me. And I always knew that if I ever wrote a novel, the first one would be about her. But honestly, back then, I did not know anything about categories. I didn't know there was such a thing as historical. I didn't know there was such a thing as, like romance. I didn't. nothing. And I think it was only 2 or 3 books into it when someone said, "Well, you're writing historical fiction." And I'm thinking, "Ooh, am I?" But it's also because it's that China, like the first 50 years of the 20th century, were the years when my parents were young and young adults, and my father would tell me a lot of stories about what it was like living in this small town in China before the Second World War. And my dad's family has a very long recorded genealogy of 36 generations, and we have a lot of legends about ancestors. So he was a really good storyteller, and he just made it so vivid in my mind that I can't help but reach for those images whenever I write. And my first 3 books actually are historical with elements of fantasy, because also I could not help but reach for the fantastical elements of the stories that he told me about our ancestors. Like I had an ancestor who saw a dragon and he spoke with immortals, and family legend has it that he became an immortal himself. This was my 7 times great grandfather. And we had an ancestor who, when he was a little boy, saw a ghost dancing across the roof of one of the houses. And it turned out that that signified death. And sure enough, the next day, someone had died in the night. And just all sorts of things. So I am very drawn to that period of history, partly because it's something that's kind of familiar to me because of my parents, but also because you've probably heard the saying that fiction requires conflict to be interesting. So it's really hard to look at any of those first 50 years of the 20th century China, and pick a year where there isn't conflict, where there isn't some catastrophe going on, or political or social change. So I just kind of gravitate towards that. And yes, we've traveled a lot, and in my job and personally, I'm kind of a travel slut. And we like, and I've been to China exactly twice, unfortunately, not recently. But again, it was one time, it was in the early 80s, and I got to see my parents' hometown. Not much changed from when they were there, kind of dusty and dilapidated, and my and then I went like in the early 2000s, and it was completely different. It was like super prosperous, and there was a park along the canal with little pavilions, and where old men were playing chess. It was just night and day. But some of the old things were still there, like the arched stone bridges were still there. It was very evocative.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, and I was so interested in how particular periods of time and places in those times are well suited to particular sort of genre explorations. So what drew you to particularly here 1911 Shanghai and bringing the Gothic in? Because it's a great very complimentary.
That's a really great question too, Jen. So 1911 is significant for the fact that it was the year before 1912, which was when the last emperor of China abdicated and China became a republic. So in the year before that, there was a lot of chaos. No one knew what was going to happen. You had all these factions who were trying to, move China into the 20th century. There were the royalists who wanted to go forward with a constitutional monarchy, because everybody knew things could not stay the way they were. And then you had the nationalists who were trying to make China a republic. You had very, very powerful warlords, some of whom had armies that were larger and better equipped than the Imperial Chinese army. And you had foreign interests who were trying to finance whichever faction they thought would be most sympathetic to their commercial requirements. So there, this gives you like this hotbed of political and social intrigue, you know. And Shanghai itself was really interesting because it was a mix of Chinese and foreign influences. And going back to the Gothic, your classic Gothic story is anchored by some kind of a mysterious mansion. And usually it's out there in the moors, someplace dark, forbidding, preferably with bad weather, you know. And you have an innocent young woman going there to this mysterious mansion and finding out that there's terrible secrets and dangers there. And because Shanghai at that time was such a potent mix of Eastern and Western, I knew I wanted to have two young women in that mansion, one Chinese and one American. So, and then you've got that hotbed of all sorts of political and social change, the dangers that are coming to them from outside, which is involved with political intrigue and greed. Um, yeah. So so there's a lot of history, but at the same time, um, I had to make sure that the dangers were coming from within the house. And actually, it was so hard to visualize the story until I found the right house. So going through, research, looking at photos of old Shanghai, I came across this mansion called Denart, which was built in 1898 by a very, very rich British lawyer, and it was huge. Like he had stables for his polo ponies. There was an artificial lake on the estate. He had, housing for his servants, kitchen gardens, rose gardens. It was huge. And I thought, wow, here I have it. It's like a foreign style, a Western style mansion, but it's plunked right there in the outskirts of Shanghai. And so I've got my spooky place where I can have things happen.
Yeah, Lennox Manor itself is so fascinating, and it was so interesting for me to learn about these these mansions that sort of combined Western architecture with Eastern decorative elements. And, I used to be a history teacher back in the day, and I used to research cultural mixing in Italy, where lots of different cultures existed in the Middle Ages. And whenever I was trying to write about it, my brain always swung between, that mixing that you see being cultural diffusion or cultural appropriation, kind of slingshotting between those two things. And it's really interesting to think about like how that's all shaped by like international travel and the legacies of colonialism and international conflict, but also like people's personal interests and how they want to present themselves to the
Mhm.
world. I kind of lost the question in there.
Yeah, and the crazy thing was in Shanghai, these huge Western style villas and mansions, they were being built by rich Chinese as well as rich foreigners because it was a status symbol. Had nothing to do with culture. It had everything to do with showing off how much money you had. So, the old style Chinese homes would have been courtyard houses, kind of like quadrangles around courtyards, and like every quadrangle would belong to a son of the family. And in this case, what I read about were these enormous villas where every son of the family had like a villas, but and on the street front you would see them as maybe four different big houses, but if you went to the back there were no fences between the gardens. It was still allowing, the generations and the families to cross back and forth as though they were still in an old style Chinese house. They some of these places had like 400 people living in an enclave. They were estates.
So the perfect setting then for this sort of story about, I guess, how
Mhm.
secrets shape our history and our lives and our interactions. I'm going to try to keep everything really vague, so I don't want to spoil too much for the readers out there. But if you could, I'd love to hear a little bit about shaping these two characters, Lisan and Caroline. I'm sorry, I was just
Yes.
um, yeah, shaping them and their dynamic. Mm.
So Lisan is an orphan who's been lucky enough to be taken into the home of her wealthy guardian, who's given her a very good education for a young woman of that time. And she is literate in English. And she's kind of worried because she realizes she's completely dependent on the goodwill of her guardian. And she's now 18, 19 years old. What is she going to do? So she answers an ad to go work for Caroline Stanton. Caroline Stanton is American. She's newlywed. She is very rich. She's an heiress twice over. Her husband is also really rich, and they have moved into this mansion called Lenox Manor, which is owned by Thomas, her husband Thomas's uncle Mason, who has promised to bring Thomas into his business in Shanghai, and they are working together on an investment in a railway business in China. So Caroline hires Lisan, and of course, Lisan has to go live with her employer. And almost from the day that she arrives at Lenox Manor, Lisan starts seeing and hearing strange things. Sometimes she sees a woman in red kind of vaguely out by the lake and the willow trees. And sometimes she hears cries in the night. And worst of all, the childhood nightmares that she used to have start coming back. And this is significant because before she was taken up by her guardian, Lisan does not remember at all what her past was when she was just a child. But these dreams, these nightmares, kind of speak to some sort of trauma that she's not, able to bring to her conscious. And she starts, between that and the voices in the night and, and seeing visions of this woman in red, she starts wondering if she's going crazy. Now, at this party, Caroline runs into someone from her past who says, I know your secrets. And he threatens to expose her. And she has come to Shanghai to get away from her past. At the same party, this very beautiful and scandalous Manchu princess, Masako Kyo, approaches Li San, and says that you look so familiar. I think I know your family, which is very upsetting for both of these young women. And from there on, sort of the strange incidents and the threats and the dangers kind of accelerate. And I really can't say anymore because then we go into spoiler territory.
It's such a great setup, and what proceeds from there is so fascinating and so unputdownable in reading terms. It's just such a great read, and yeah, I have a lot of Gothic readers here at the library that I am very, very excited to recommend it to. I know that, when you're busy marketing a new book that's coming out, kind of all other things go to the side for a little while. But what is on your horizon? Are you writing currently?
So, first of all, my next big commitment is that Kate Quinn and I will be working on a second co-authored book together. So, we need to clear our desks, and probably around the middle of June, we'll start working together. And this title is tentatively The Jade Mirror, and it's an adventure on the high seas because, every so often Kate gets emails from readers who say, oh, have you heard about Mary Ann Brown Patton, who was 19 years old and she had to overcome a mutiny on the ship when her husband, who was the captain, fell ill. And every so often I would get email from readers saying, have you heard of Madame Zhang, the notorious pirate queen in China, who actually commanded 700 ships and was like the most successful pirate in all of history? And so Kate and I were chatting about this, and we were thinking, is there a way we can bring them both into the same story, even though they operate in different timelines? And we decided we wanted to do it because we really had fun working on the Phoenix Crown together. And when Kate first approached me about the Phoenix Crown and said, would you like to co-author a book together? I was like, okay, but I really want us to still be speaking to each other after it's over. And we did. We were fine. We're still friends, and friends enough that we're thinking of writing another book together. And then, very kindly, our publisher in Canada, we're both with HarperCollins in Canada, they are putting Kate and I on a book tour through Canada in March. So her book, The Astral Library, comes out a week after mine. So they just put us together. So we're on tour again together, which is like way more fun than traveling on your own and slogging through an airport on your own. And I'm sure that we will be plotting for the Jade Mirror in our spare time.
That's so exciting on so many levels. That's wonderful. I'm so excited that you have books coming out at the same time that allowed that to happen. That's such a nice little confluence.
Yes, yes, it's a real perk. It's a real perk.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our show. It's just been a delight. And yeah, I'm very excited for our patrons who get to read this.
I've always loved Gothic. I mean, people read Rebecca and Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights and so on. And this was just a challenge that I could not resist, which was to transplant all those Gothic tropes into old Shanghai and make it interesting, relevant to the history of that era, but still keep it within recognizable Gothic parameters. So that was the challenge I set for myself. And I really hope that your library clients enjoy the read.
Wow, that is so interesting. And that does make me think about, how, yeah, bringing a different genre lens to a different time period that can reveal new things in the genre, in our view, how we view history. Like, what an interesting exercise. So, yeah, thank you again. This has been great.
Thank you, Jen.
Nice. All right, listeners, please check out The Fourth Princess. As you hear this, it is out in the world. So head to your favorite bookstore or library or website and check out the Astral Library in March as well. It sounds like it's going to be great. All right. Thank you for listening. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.